Begin now. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar on Defender for Business. Today's webinar, we're going to focus on a variety of different topics, such as the partner opportunity of the product, how it compares against the other Defender products within the Microsoft stack, a bit about Business Premium and Lighthouse and how Defender for Business can help with those products as well. And then finally, we're going to have a demo and feature walkthrough of some of the features within the product itself. So my name is Peter Graham. I'm one of the partner development managers here at Ingram Microcloud for the collaboration and content team, formerly known as the Modern Workplace team. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Matthew Bond, who is our solutions architect for the Modern Workplace as well. So in terms of the opportunity for partners, as you're aware, cybersecurity is a big focus for a lot of companies these days. 1 in 4 organizations every single month are hit by some sort of cyber attack or threat in their organization. And it's up to you guys, the partners, the MSPs, the SIs, everyone, to ensure that minimum damage is done to those customers, and the risk is reduced as much as possible. And Microsoft has got a range of different products that can hopefully help alleviate and ensure that IT companies have all the tools at their disposal to assist their customers. So you can see here from some of the stats and things like that, the biggest call out, and I'm sure this is no surprise, that 90% of customers say that they would switch an IT partner if they were offered better security. And that's not necessarily on price, that's also on usability and other things as well. And Microsoft obviously is very on top of that, obviously with all the endpoints that Microsoft covers, not just in the commercial space, but also across its consumer devices, including Windows for home and consumer, Office 365 for home and things like that, and also Xbox and Bing, the search engine that nobody really uses. Microsoft has all the capabilities of monitoring what activity different cyber organizations or cyber threats are using. And so Microsoft is using its breadth and its global knowledge around it to ensure that all the platforms that the customer's accessing their business through, be that Windows or iOS, Android or Mac, that the partner can keep their customers safe from threats. So Defender used to be a bit of a swear word back in the day. I'm sure you can all remember back in like the Windows 7 days or Windows XP days, and it's still kind of a bit of a sour taste in some people's mouths. But Microsoft has been investing billions of dollars every single year to ensure that the Defender platform is the go-to AV solution for everyone. I know from experience and talking to other colleagues in the channel that even Microsoft themselves use Defender for their own organization. They obviously use E5, and they've, Microsoft, not that they're publicly admit it, I guess, has never had a breach or a significant breach under its kind of different controls and things like that it offers. Obviously, it's down to the IT partner or the customer in terms of what policies and procedures that they want to set in. And very much in the case of Microsoft hands you the keys to the car and you can go and modify it and design it and drive it and take it away and do what you want with it. So obviously, naturally, Defender has various different aspects of it, and the naming convention obviously can be a bit challenging for some. So hopefully we're going to help with you understanding what is the differences between some of these products and why Defender for Business is quite a unique solution. When it comes down to it, obviously, I'm sure you remember there was Microsoft Advanced Threat Protection, Plan 1, Plan 2. That's now Defender for Office, Plan 1, Plan 2. So there's 2 other Defender options there that you do typically get in the SMB stacks. And on the screen in front of you now, we have the AV requirements for it. So this is the actual antivirus itself. You've got Defender for Endpoint Plan 1, which is fairly new, and Defender for Endpoint Plan 2, which has been the one that was previously called Defender for Endpoint, which is the one that's included within E5, as you can see there. And Microsoft's seen an opportunity where there was a lot of SMBs under 300 seats for its cap, where they were not buying into the Microsoft ecosystem of E5 just because it was just so expensive. And so Microsoft has decided to bring some of the core features from its E5 security offerings into an affordable product for SMBs and for partners to obviously sell to their customers and customize it in the ways that fit their business needs. So as you can see here, it does look fairly busy in terms of a feature and functionality, which Matthew will cover off shortly. But as you can see down from the list there is a lot more functionality within Defender for Business than there is for Defender for Endpoint Plan 1. And there is obviously some caveats to that, but from an affordability standpoint, Defender for Business will meet the needs of a growing business that needs enterprise level security for their environment, as you can see from all the features there. Now, Defender for Business was originally launched within Business Premium several months ago. And it has been kind of in preview recently as well. It is now available as a standalone product at around £2.30 per user per month. And it will be coming to the cloud marketplace next month. So you will be able to buy it as a standalone product on the cloud marketplace. But if you do need it today for a customer who's not on Business Premium, please get in touch with our sales team and they can assist you with that. But for any of your customers that are on Business Premium, which I would like to say is a lot, as it is very fastly growing as Microsoft's most popular SMB SKU. You get it already within the stack. You just need to go into the Office Admin Center, which Matthew will show you later, and turn it on and start customizing the features and functionality that is required for your customers. And whenever we look at this, I just want to point out that the price point has not changed. Obviously, there was price rises in March from the kind of £15.10 per user per month to £16.60. There has been no significant price change by adding Defender for Business into the Business Premium standalone SKU. So when it comes down to a customer who's been on Business Premium for several years now, they get even more value in the product than they did before. Microsoft is constantly evolving this SKU. Obviously, back in 2019, I believe it was, when they added conditional access and things like that, and obviously the ability to do shared computer activation and things like that. It is constantly evolving based on partner feedback and customer feedback. So I just want to point out that this product, when you compare it against the likes of Business Standard and things like that, Business Standard at £9.40, you'll also get Intune within this, EMS E3 and things like that. And Azure Active Directory P1, all of this value on top of that would push the customers above £22 a seat, and you're getting it for £16.60. So it's a very, very good value add. Obviously, just to kind of reiterate, it is capped at 300 seats. So if you had a customer that had 300 Business Premium and then they suddenly had to grow, you couldn't just go ahead and buy Defender for Business add-on because it is capped at 300 seats. And obviously with NCE, Microsoft has the capability to ensure that the seat cap thresholds are met. Now, you cannot use both of them in conjunction with either or the other. So you need to be aware that once the customer hits that 300 seat cap, they will need to look at Defender for Endpoint. Right. This is just a quick breakdown of what the features and functionality are within what Business Premium looked like beforehand, before it was introduced to Defender for Business, and what it looks like now. So you can see here down in the bottom corner here, highlighted in the hazed yellow, you can see that the functionality of Defender for Business brought into Business Premium is a lot of endpoint security functionalities for the customer, and we will cover off some of the sales tactics shortly as well. Now, one of the key things that I want to point out with Defender for Business is Microsoft 365 Lighthouse. Now, if you're not aware of Microsoft 365 Lighthouse, it is a new portal dashboard that allows you to see all of your tenants that you manage as an MSP under one view. Now, the caveat to that is that this will only highlight the customers that are eligible with the eligible licensing, which is Defender for Business, Business Premium, and the Microsoft 365 kind of E3, E5 enterprise SKUs as well. So there are very bespoke SKUs that you must have for your customers' tenants in order to pull through the relevant details on them. So you can set policies and create templates across all of your customers that you manage. You can look at all the different threats, all the devices, all in one view, rather than having to log into each individual tenant, which has been a massive pain point for partners for the last several years. This here is a game changer when it comes to managing all of your customer security in one portal, one kind of user kind of login, and you can see all the different activity that is going on within the customer's tenants on a graph or anything like that. When it comes to positioning Defender for Business, now I'm not going to go through all the details that are on screen here. You can take a screenshot, you can have a look through that. But the biggest caveat that I would say is when you're looking at it and thinking, do you know what, I've already got an AV requirement in here. I don't need to look at Defender for Business, or it's too expensive, or the solution I have is better and things like that. The one thing I would say is please, please, please consider looking at it, because with how much channel shift there is between partners and customers all the time, you will always come up against another partner that will position the product. You will always come up against somebody who will highlight to the customer what are they paying for and what have they got turned on within their subscription. And you don't want to be left in the dark where you're selling your customer a business premium, for instance, and the other partner or the other incumbent comes to the customer and says, well, actually, you get a lot of that functionality already in your subscription at no additional cost. And the partner, is highlighting that the customer just needs to turn that on, and then the customer is coming to you going, why haven't you spoken to me about this? Why haven't you turned this on? This is suitable for what I need. I want to cut my costs in a different way. And partners are using that to their advantage, where you might be removing your third-party AV, be that WebRoot or Sophos or anything else, and the partner is thinking, oh, I'm going to lose all that revenue. That revenue is not going to be lost because partners are using that revenue that they would potentially lose from a third-party AV and creating that as a new managed service product. They are creating a new managed service product off the back of Business Premium and Defender for Business by saying, we will highlight to you these reports and these insights into what's going on within your business on a regular basis, but it is a chargeable fee. And it is proving to be very successful. We will drop in some links later, and again, you can pick up with this for some Microsoft case studies of partners all over the world who are already starting to adopt Defender for Business into their sales pitches, and it is going to help you be more competitive, because if the customer is buying from another partner and they've maybe got Business Standard and a third-party AV and a third-party RMM tool and device management and things like that, you could consolidate it all down into one SKU, making it easier for the customer to see what products they're paying for on their invoice at a cheaper rate, and then you could show your value-added services as an additional add-on, which is a fantastic thing. So I'm now going to pass on to Matthew, our solutions architect, who's going to go through a walkthrough demo of Defender for Business in a live environment. So Matthew.
Primer before I dive into the portal of the main functionality and features within Defender for Business. As Pete's mentioned, Defender for Business is an endpoint security solution. It's designed for SMBs, that's delivering enterprise-grade protection, and it's easier to use. Some of the main features of Defender for Business cover both more of a reactive approach, so responding to and mediating threats, but also being more proactive and hardening your device security. One of the first features is next generation protection. That is the advanced antivirus component, which is designed to catch all the latest emerging threats. This will utilize behavior-based monitoring, heuristics, real-time protection, and various cloud-delivered protection from the cloud with various machine learning models and a lot more. Following on from that is endpoint detection and response. This is for more advanced threat detection. So it allows you to detect advanced threats and respond to them appropriately for threats that maybe got past the antivirus component and other protections on the device. Endpoint detection and response, which will be generating alerts and incidents for you to triage, for you to manage, for you to investigate, and ultimately for you to respond to potential threats on devices. With that is automated investigation and remediation. Whenever there's an alert generated, whenever there's a threat detected on a device, Defender for Endpoint will seek to automatically investigate that, respond to it, and overall remediate the threat. What this allows you to do is to get rid of those low volume, low fidelity, high volume alerts that aren't really super important, but they nonetheless take up a lot of time, and allows you to reduce that alert volume and focus on more higher value activities, such as responding to more serious threats or hardening your devices. That's where threat and vulnerability management comes in. A large part of Defender for Endpoint is hardening your devices. With threat and vulnerability management, it allows you to continuously monitor your devices for misconfigurations in the operating system, vulnerabilities in the operating system, and also vulnerabilities in the installed software, and inform you of these. Then it provides you with detailed guidance to remediate and securely configure your devices to address these issues, overall making the devices harder to attack because you're reducing the overall vulnerability and exposure of the device. And within the same kind of school of thought of that is attack surface reduction. Attack surface reduction has various capabilities to reduce the overall attack surface on a device so that attackers can't exploit parts of the operating system or software to further their attacks. This involves a set of rules and configurations that you can set up on the device, such as not allowing Office to create child processes, as an example. With that kind of quick introduction, I'll hop into the portal and we'll go through what the kind of initial configuration looks like and what some of these features look like as well. So where Defender for Endpoint is Defender for Business is set up is in M365 Defender portal, so the security portal. This is where you would also configure email protection such as Defender for Office 365 if you have that as well, but it's also where Defender for Business is set up. Now, before I dive into some of the feature set, the first thing to be thinking about with Defender for Business is how do you enroll your devices? That's pretty easy. We first go to Settings, and then Endpoints, and then we can go down here to Onboarding. Now, ignore the rest of the things in this setting portal. We'll go over those later. Enrolling devices into Defender for Endpoint is really easy because it's utilizing a sensor that's already on the Windows operating system. So you don't need to install an agent. You don't need to install any additional software for it to work. It's utilizing something that's already on the operating system, and you just need to activate it. Now, you can enroll in Defender for Business in multiple ways. You can run a script on the devices, which is really just for testing. You can use group policy. You can use Endpoint Configuration Manager, or in my opinion, the best way would be if you're using Microsoft Intune, because it's a simple case of creating a configuration profile and assigning it to users' devices, and it will then proceed to enroll those devices in Defender for Business. It's a really straightforward and really easy process and saves time. And we start to factor it in with other features of the Microsoft stack, such as automatic enrollment with Azure AD P1. You can really start to implement a seamless onboarding experience for end user devices into Defender for Business. And it does support a wider variety of operating systems. It's not just Windows 10, it will also be Linux, Android, and some older operating systems as well. Following on from that, something to think about is actually configuring some of these features. Within Defender for Business, there is here the section called Configuration Management. What this allows us to do is to configure some introductory features relating to both the antivirus component, but also relating to the firewall. And it's a really simple wizard experience. You don't have to worry about going through and actually going onto the device, doing various group policy or different configurations. It's a simple case of configuring the policy here in the portal. So if I want to say configure next generation protection here, or antivirus, I just need to select add. I'll name our policy. Potentially give it a bit of a description if we need to. It might be useful for informing other administrators of what this policy does. What we then need to do is to scope what devices will be affected by this policy. And we do that by creating what's called a device group. It just allows us to scope and select what devices will be affected and impacted by this policy configuration. So what we do is we can either create a new group or use an existing one if we've created one already. But I'll create a new one. What we'll do is we'll name that group. So AV devices. Again, put a description in if you like. And then we can target the devices into this group, and as a result, target them into this policy. So I can select 2 devices here, and then I can create this group. With that done, I can click next, and then I can start to set up some of the configuration settings, in this case, relating to next generation protection or antivirus. This will be things such as turning on real-time protection, block at first sight, which increases our sensitivity to potential threats, network protection, potentially unwanted software protection, our scans, how often do we want our scans to be running, what scans do we want to be running, the end user experience, such if they want to be able to access the Windows Security app, and any antivirus exclusions as well. And once we're happy with that configuration, we just select next, and we can create our policy. And it's a simple case of now, all those devices that we put into the device group and scoped into this policy will now have this configuration rolled out to them. We can do the exact same thing for configuring the firewall on the device. Just a simple case of pressing add, naming the policy, and using a device group. In this case, again, I could create a new device group, or I could use an existing one and just simply select it here and apply, and then go on to do the configuration settings. In this case, you're controlling things such as inbound connections, which is by default blocking inbound connections for certain behavior, but you can also add custom rules as well. And then you proceed and you create the policy. Now it's worth noting, these are just 2 options here for configuring certain security related settings on the device. If you're using Intune or another device management platform, you're going to be able to do a lot more high level and low level configuration. This is just a case of making an easy portal experience to get initially set up with devices in relation to security. So quickly configuring their antivirus and quickly configuring their firewall. But if you're already using something like Intune, you very well may just decide to use that instead for this configuration. With that, we've done the initial setup. Now, what do we do when the device Defender for Endpoint detects an alert, a threat, an incident, something like that? Now, what that will do is whenever there's a threat detected on the device, Defender for Endpoint will generate an alert. And what then Defender for Endpoint will do is it will group those alerts into something called an incident. So what Defender for Business will look at is it'll look at, for instance, if multiple alerts or on multiple devices have similar tactics, or maybe multiple events have occurred on the same device within a short period of time. Because what Defender for Business will then do is it will correlate these alerts into these incidents. So instead of looking at all these different alerts individually, we can actually look at a single incident itself. It means we can save time when we're doing this investigation and this remediation process, because we're not just looking at multiple alerts, going through one by one trying to figure out what happened. Defender for Business will neatly group these alerts into an incident, and we can use that instead. So if I click onto this incident, I can get some high level detail, such as if it's assigned to someone, in which case I can assign it to somebody if I like to triage it. The categories of attack, so we'll use the MITRE, ATT, and CK tactics to classify what kind of categories this attack comes in, such as initial access or discovery or exfiltration. You can have a high-level overview of the impacted assets, the users that have been impacted, and the active alerts as well. And you can choose to add some comments if you like as well, if you're collaborating with other users to investigate this incident. But what you really want to do is you want to go into the detailed incident page itself. Because what we can do with Defender for Business is we can investigate across the entire alert story, all the devices affected, all the users affected, and start to look at what Defender for Business has actually done to remediate these threats. First of all, we get the summary. So we get an idea of how many active alerts there are, how many tactics are being used as part of this attack, some of the impacted assets, such as the users and the devices, how much evidence was actually found in terms of malicious entities, being files, processes, etc., and some more high-level incident information. But what we really want to do is actually dig into some of these alerts. So we can look at all the alerts that have been part of this incident, and we can see how severe they are, if they're active, devices affected, etc. So we can sort it by the severity of alerts that have been detected. We can click on the alert itself and get some high-level understanding, such as If it's been assigned to someone, again, with incidents and alerts, you can manage them and you can assign them to individuals for them to be responsible for. If there's been any categories, what was the detection source? Was it EDR, so more behavioral based, more advanced, or was it antivirus, where it's more looking at the files and their behavior? And description, and any related alerts to the incident. Now what we can then do is we can go to a dedicated alert page to get a much deeper understanding of what's occurred to generate this alert in the first place. Since it's all well and good looking at a high level view of all the alerts in an incident, what we really want to understand is what's happened. So this is where the alert page comes in and the alert story. We can see the impacted device, so this device here called test, it's Windows 10 and it's got a high value device, as well as the impacted user account. In this case, this is just a local user account, but if you had Azure AD, you'd have much more detail here. And then we can have this alert story. So we can have a full story of events that have occurred prior and after this alert being generated. So we can see the EXEs, the files, the commands that have been run. If there's been command line or PowerShell scripts being run, we can see that as well. And then we can see here, it led to this backdoor.exe being run, which was the malicious threat. We can click on that and we can get some more detail on this right pane here about the specific file that was malicious. So we can see the file path, the process name, when it was executed, and some more details such as the virus total detection ratio, so how confident it is that this is actually a malware file, the actual malware that's been detected by the antivirus engine, and if there's any active alerts relating to it. We can do some things such as, if we're absolutely sure we don't want to see this again, we could go ahead and add it as an indicator, which means we can add this as an indicator of compromise, which means if this file is ever seen again, it won't be allowed to be written, to be read, to be copied, to function on the device at all. And we simply go through and create an indicator for this file. So we could say, name the indicator, maybe description, and when this indicator might expire. And then what we can specify, if this file is ever seen again, an action. So we can allow it, which means it will be essentially an exception, an exclusion. We can audit it, which means we won't do anything, but we will generate an alert. We can warn, which means the user will receive a warning that the file might be malicious, but they can optionally bypass that if they choose to. And then we can block, or we can block and remediate, which will just remediate the alert as well and apply a remediation action. And then we can go through this process. We can fill out the alert details that we generate in the portal, and then we can finish this hash indicator. But that's just an example of, we can go through this alert story here, we can find different components that might seem suspicious, and we can add them as indicators of the future. But we can also get an understanding of what's occurred, such as looking at the command line here, you can actually see the command line that was ran. You can get a full understanding of the course of events that have occurred for this single alert to be generated. And that's just one alert. We could go through as many as we like, but as we're going through them, we can manage them, we can classify them. So if I'm, say, happy that this alert isn't malicious, I could say manage this alert, and then I can classify it. So if it's a true positive, is it maybe expected activity, such as security testing, or is it a false positive where it's blatantly a case where it's not right? If we're confident that we have an understanding of what this alert was, what happened to generate it, we can classify it, and then if we've remediated it, it can then be remediated and closed. Additionally, in the incident view, you'll get a view of the devices that have been impacted by this incident, by these alerts, and how risky the device still is by virtue of its risk level. The risk level being how many active alerts still persist on the device. That could just be the case that some things just need to be closed because it might be suspicious behavior. Things like files tend to be remediated automatically. But again, we can click on this device and get more detail. So we're going through the investigation here. We've looked at the alerts. Now we're going to look at the device. So we can see some details about the device, such as its domain, the operating system, if it's healthy, if it's active, inactive, if it's managed by Endpoint Manager, and any active alerts as well. But what we can also do is we can go to a device page, a dedicated device page for that. So if I go here, we can see what this dedicated device page actually looks like. So we have some high-level overview of the device and its details, such as open instance, active alerts, some additional details again relating to its workgroup, its domain, its operating system, its health state. and any potential network activity that's been seen. We can get an overview of how many active alerts are on the device. And additionally, something we'll look into later is any vulnerabilities in the device. But we can go into these in much more detail. Again, we can dig into the alerts, and if we want to, just like the incident, we can click into these alerts and go to these dedicated alert pages again. We're not limited by that. In most things in Defender for Business, you'll be able to click through them. You'll be able to look into more detail and get a better understanding yourself. There are things here such as security recommendations, which is more relating to threat and vulnerability management we'll look at later. But if there's any recommendations for improving security on the device, we'll also see that on the device page. Likewise, we'll get a software inventory so we can see any software that's been installed on the device and if that software has any weaknesses and if there's been discovered vulnerabilities. And if there's any. Cool. So when we're looking at these devices, these actual device pages as part of the investigation, we want to be thinking about response actions. If there is an active threat on the device, we, generally speaking, want to consider what we can do to actually remediate that threat and maybe prevent it from progressing. So that's where we have these response actions up here. Well, naturally, we can tag the device. So there are tags. We can tag the device if as part of an incident investigation, so if it's part of a specific threat, or maybe it's just a type of device. We can also isolate the device. So when we isolate the device, we can actually isolate it from the network and prevent it from communicating with anything except the Defender for Endpoint service. However, we can also continue to allow things such as Outlook, Teams, and Skype for Business to continue. Now, when we do any of these actions, we have to provide a justification as to why we did it, and then we can log that. So if we say want to isolate this device, we have to put a justification in. And then what we would see is in the Action Center here, we would see any history of actions that have been taken. So the Action Center is almost an administrative log where you can see any actions that have been taken as part of a device response or even automated investigations. And then I can just confirm that, and then that will go ahead and isolate the device, and it'll do that as a pending action. What we can also do is we can restrict app execution. So we can ensure that no applications can run on a device other than applications that have been signed by Microsoft. In which case, we just have to, again, we have to justify that action and it will appear in the Action Center as a thing that we've done, and it can be undone. It can be undone whenever we like. We can, of course, run an antivirus scan. We can run a quick or a full scan. We can do what's called a collected investigation package. So that's almost forensics information about the device. It's a big zip file that contains things such as processes, registry keys, registry changes, scheduled events, things like that. It's a massive forensics file that you can download. It's a big zip file that allows you to get an understanding of what's happening on the device. Now, we can initiate a live response session. Now, a live response session allows us to actually open a shell connection to the device where we can then proceed to run commands and even run PowerShell scripts on the device in response to threats. So this won't be an active device since it is a demo, but we would be able to run things like getting the running processes or running scripts or even analyzing entities to see if they're suspicious or if they're malicious. And it's just a simple case of going here, we can upload files to the library and we can upload PowerShell scripts so that you can go ahead and run scripts on the device. So I have this connection established here with the live response session, and I can say help, and I can look at all the different commands I can do. I can get an idea of services that are running on the device, the processes that are running on the device, any persistence methods, any scheduled tasks. So it allows us to really respond in the name live response, and we can even start to run scripts in response to threats and gives us a lot more of a deeper level of response on the device by able to write our own scripts, upload it to the library, and then run it through live response. We can initiate a general purpose automated investigation. That'll just generate a general purpose automated investigation. All that really means is that an automated investigation will be run. It won't have an alert to base it off of, but it will begin to look for threats. And if there are any threats that are detected on the device during that time, it will generate alerts and it will begin to scope those alerts into that investigation. So we don't just have to base these automated investigations off alerts generated, we can actually use them to look for alerts, since this will be using processes that real-world threat analysts will use, real-world playbooks, and it will really behave like an actual threat analyst. So if I go back to the incident here, that's the devices. We can also see the users that are impacted by this incident, any applications that are being used as part of it as well, and then we can see the investigations. So that's another big part. We've looked at the alerts, we've looked at the devices, we've looked at the users, so we understand what's being impacted by this incident. So we understand what's kind of happening, we've looked at the alert story, we've looked at the devices, and we have a good idea that there is a threat. Investigations, what will be happening in the background, will automatically seek to remediate those threats and classify and close the alert if it is the case. So we can actually see these investigations here. It's relating to a PowerShell dropped a suspicious file. The status is remediated, and the service source is Defender for Endpoint, but it really means Defender for Business. And we can see it lasted for 18 minutes. We can click into this and get a much deeper understanding of what this investigation has actually done to remediate this threat. And it gives us a kind of graphical view, if you like. So first of all, we get this summary here. The investigation was running for 18 minutes. And it was only really pending for 4 seconds because it will automatically enact any remediation actions. The status was remediated, which means that the malicious entities that were discovered were remediated, being quarantined, removed, process stopped, whatever it may be. And we can see how that is visualized here. So the alert was generated, it correlated an additional alert that was similar into this investigation. It's relating to this device called test here. It analysed over 4,000 entities to identify potentially malicious entities such as files, processes, and more. And out of those entities analysed, it found 4 that were malicious, and it remediated them. We can see the alerts that were scoped into this investigation. So there was 2 here relating to specifically the files that was dropped and the scheduled tasks that were created. So a lot of alerts might be behavioural based, which are more this suspicious thing happened, this happened, etc. Whereas you will get alerts like this that will be scoped into investigation that are more substantial. They will be some things changed on the device that need to be remediated, and that's what these investigations will seek to remediate and undo. We can have a look at the devices that have been scoped into this investigation, and these investigations can expand their scope. They're not static. It can actually additionally add up to 10 devices at a time to an investigation. After 10, you would need to approve it in the Action Center, but it can continuously expand the scope of its investigation if it thinks an attack is much wider scale, such as similar tactics that were detected on this device suddenly being on another device in the organization and another one. What this investigation would then do is seek to continuously expand the scope of its investigation until it's sure that it's going to remediate all the threats. We can look at the evidence, so we can actually look at what's been found that is remediated. So in this case, there was a file here that was found and it was remediated. It was quarantined. There also was a scheduled task here that was created, and that scheduled task was removed as well. However, if we're not sure that that was the right decision, we can undo it if we'd like. If we want to see all the entities analysed, we can, but they're in the thousands. This just gives you a good understanding of the scope and scale of these investigations and what they will do to find the threats well beyond what a human could do. And then finally, for transparency, we can look at the log, so we can see exactly what this investigation has done to find threats on the device. So first of all, it's checking the drivers, the services running, it's classifying IP addresses, it's analysing files, it's analysing the file metadata, it's then quarantining that file, and then it's checking for persistence methods to ensure that that file doesn't remain on the device. In some cases, this could be almost reactionary. So there could be a case where a file's already been quarantined. The investigation will still run to ensure that the threat doesn't persist. So just because maybe the antivirus deals with the threat, it doesn't mean that the investigation won't run. The investigation will seek to find persistence methods for a threat to persist. If you go to the entities here again, you can see it looks at over 285 potential persistence methods to ensure that a removed and quarantined threat can't come back after a restart. And just on this instant page, if you have multiple investigations running, you can get an all-up view of the evidence and response, and also in general, so you can see all the evidence that was found of malicious activity. This could just be the case of suspicious commands being run, but also suspicious files and malicious files that need to be removed, persistence methods, processes, etc. There's not much you can really do with it. If you maybe think it's not right, you can undo it, but this is for us to get an understanding of what's been found to be malicious, so we can be happy that the threat is resolved. And then just finally, on this incident, we can get a graph view. That gives us a visual understanding of the threat and how it's progressed. So we can get kind of grouped here into nodes, if we like, to see the kind of scope and scale, so the user, the device, the processes, the files that are found. We can group them into similar nodes if we like, or we can keep them pretty much all like this on their own. Again, it gives us an understanding in a more visual way of how this incident has progressed and allows us to investigate in a way that we might prefer. Additionally, we can play what's called an attack story, which actually gives us a minute-by-minute view of how a threat's progressed. So suspicious behavior in Word, suspicious PowerShell was then run, and then there was a suspicious file dropped in the device. So this gives us a kind of more of a story understanding of what's occurred in that instant for transparency, but it's also good to know what's happened so we can ensure it doesn't happen in the future. In this case, we could look at this story here, and we could get an understanding that it started with a Word file. So Word was behaving suspiciously, then a PowerShell script was run, and then that PowerShell script dropped a suspicious file on the device. So it gives us a really good way to actually look at how this has happened and what has actually happened, and then the result. And when we're happy with these incidents, we've looked at the alerts, we've looked at the alert story, we understand what's happened there, we've looked at the impacted devices, we've taken some response actions to make sure that the device is locked down, maybe ensuring that the device can't communicate elsewhere. We've looked at the investigations to have an idea of what was done to remediate the threat, and we've had a look at the evidence and the actual graph view. Once we've done that, we might want to go to Manage Incident here and change its status. So it might be active in progress. We might say it's now resolved. And if we change it to resolved, we might provide it with a classification. Now, these classifications are important because it gives Microsoft a better understanding of when it's getting things right, when it's getting things wrong, so it can really start to train those machine learning systems that it uses in Defender for Business. So when we classify it, we could say, yep, it's a true positive, maybe it was malware, maybe it was a multi-staged attack, or maybe it was informational, so it was expected, maybe it was a security test, or maybe it was just a line of business applications that we run, or maybe it was blatantly a false positive. They all help Microsoft train their algorithms to better recognize threats in the future. Additionally, if we're maybe not wanting to finish it off, we can put some comments in. Again, if we're collaborating with other users that are investigating these threats, we might want to add some comments in just so they understand what we're thinking, maybe what we're doing, that kind of thing. So you can really start to collaborate with other users that might be investigating these threats. But in large, for most threats, you will find that they're automatically investigated and automatically remediated as well. You're more doing some post-breach kind of looking at what happened. And that's the instance view. So again, it's collating all these alerts into instance that we investigate as one. Defender for Business will then automatically investigate it, remediate it, and provide you all the details you need to understand what happened. That's more of a reactive thing. It's generating alerts, generating an incident because something happened already. There's ways we can be more proactive though. There's another feature called threat analytics. What threat analytics is essentially it's threat intelligence. Threat analytics is where Microsoft will correlate and post the latest threats around the world that are affecting organizations and provide you with a detailed report of what that threat is and what you can do to prepare for that threat and ensure that your organization doesn't become a victim of that threat. We do get some insights, so the latest threats, so various CVEs, various exploits, some high impact threats. So this is where we can actually see if any threats have impacted our organization. So we can see down here, no alerts, resolved alerts, active alerts. So not only can we see the latest insights and threats, we can actually understand if maybe this is something that we've came across before. And then there's the highest exposure threats. Now, I don't have any data relating to threat and vulnerability management specifically in this tenant, but if we maybe had some really bad configurations and really bad vulnerabilities, it would actually tell us if we are susceptible to that. So if we are exposed to it and what we can do to prepare for it. But what we also get down here is these threat reports. So I can click into various threats and understand the latest threats around the world. In this case, it's relating to a support diagnostic tool, remote code execution vulnerability. Give me a bit of an overview of what it is, if I've had any related incidents in my environment, if I have any impacted assets, or if I'm even just exposed to it. I can then look at the detailed and full analyst report to get a full understanding of what this threat is, what Microsoft has found, what various threat intelligence experts have found, and various remediation actions and things that we can take in response. Now these, in this case, this is more of a shorter one, but you can get really, really long ones that provide a lot of detail. It just depends on the threat that's been found. If you do have any impacted assets, related incidents, you would be able to see these here. And then there's exposure and mitigations, where we can actually look at ways that we can better prepare for this threat. It's all good and well knowing that the threat exists. We want to prepare our organisation for if it ever comes to our door, especially if it's a relatively substantial and wide-ranging one that's affecting a lot of organisations. So we can actually look at the various security configurations that we can change and the various vulnerabilities that we might have in our organisation. In this case, I don't have any, but it would give us a good understanding of potentially what we can do to ensure these threats don't affect us. Now that kind of moves on to our next point really, which is how do we be proactive with our devices? How do we proactively ensure that we're remediating misconfigurations, we're getting rid of vulnerabilities, and we're ensuring that if a threat does attack our devices, we're best prepared for it because we've hardened our devices. That's where vulnerability management comes into play. Threat and vulnerability management, like we've said in the overview, is a way for you to understand, in a few ways, how exposed you are as an organization. So that gives you an exposure score. So how many active recommendations do you have potentially that should be resolved, and how bad are they? Maybe you're really exposed and you need to resolve that. Just saying how exposed you are. It'll give you some insights, such to certain devices exposed to a certain vulnerability, your top security recommendations, and top events. And it's really just insights here. What we want to dive into is the specific recommendations down here. Now, I don't have many because I'm just using virtual machines that don't have much data and they're not really configured. But these misconfigurations will we'll get recommendations here on how we can remediate potential misconfigurations. You can see here there's a few ones that are a bit more mundane. Update Windows Defender to version 1.1.19. There's also here a 0-day vulnerability that's recommending that there's a Windows 10 vulnerability that we need to look at. So we can click into this and we can actually get a lot of detail about what this vulnerability is, how it affects us, how it might affect us. So it will tell us it's been found in our devices. We can see how many CVEs there are, so those are the vulnerabilities. How many exposed devices we have, so we have 4 devices exposed to this. The same with the installed devices. And any associated CVEs, so we can see the actual weaknesses that have been found. So in this case, it's CVE 2022-30190. So again, this is a case of we're looking at a vulnerability here that's a 0-day vulnerability. It's actually telling us by this tag. We might have something here that's a bit more mundane. It's a bit more description. You just want to update Windows Defender to the latest version, and you can mitigate 7 known vulnerabilities from that. We can see the exposed devices and those CVEs themselves. Now, if we want to actually go ahead and ensure that this happens, what we can do is we can request a remediation. Now, this is where the integration between Defender for Business and Endpoint Manager Intune really comes into play, because we can actually generate a ticket that will appear in Endpoint Manager. So we can say open a ticket in Endpoint Manager. We can say the remediation due date, the priority, and some details. In this case, it's just update this software. And then we can go ahead and create this remediation request. That will then appear as a ticket in the Intune portal under endpoint security. And then somebody who's maybe working in the Intune portal can see that ticket and then process the request. So we're asking them to update Windows Defender. They can go ahead and do it for us. If we do want to track these remediation requests, we can go down here to remediation and it will track these. So when we do create them, it will track the progress that's being made. So if they do update Windows Defender on a device, we'll see this progress ticker go up to 1. In this case, I have another one that I requested here, which is blocking Office applications, injecting code. Put it on one device, it's completed. So it allows us to keep track of the actual progress of our remediation requests. Additionally, under vulnerability management, we get a greater insight and visibility into our software as well. So we have inventories here, which gives us an understanding of the software that's been installed on devices and how vulnerable that software might have, because it'll tell us how many weaknesses it has, the CVEs. But we'll also get some insights here under threats. So we can see here a remote code execution exploit is available for this software and for these weaknesses. Again, Windows Defender, Threat Insights, remote code execution. So not only is it going to tell us if our software is vulnerable, it's going to tell us if our software actually has exploits that are being actively utilized and exploited. And it'll update us and let us know when that happens. We can also just dive in much deeper. So we can go into Windows 10 here, and we can even go to a dedicated software page. That'll give us an understanding of this specific software. So the vulnerabilities, the recommendations, the devices installed, and even a version distribution if we like. So we can actually start to deep dive into individual bits of software to understand how that software might be vulnerable for our organization and how we can actually work to improve that through the security recommendations. Because what it's really doing is it's telling us Windows 10 has one CVE, one weakness. Windows Defender has 7. So it's kind of grouping these weaknesses together so that we can update the software and make sure that it's not vulnerable. However, if we want to, we can also go to the weaknesses page here and get an all-up view of every vulnerability, every CVE that is in our organization that can be exploited. So again, we have sorted by severity, the related software and how old it is, when it was published, when it was updated, and the amount of exposed devices. So in this case, we have 4 for pretty much every single one. And we can click into these and again, get some more high-level detail and understanding of what this vulnerability is, potentially what we can do to remediate it as well. And it could take us to the related security recommendation, which in this case would just be update Windows 10, update Windows Defender in this case. But it gives us a different view that we can use. And finally, we get an event timeline. The event timeline is more of a way to track how vulnerabilities are introduced into the organization. So it gives us a bit of a timeline with a date, how many entities were originally impacted when it was introduced, how many are currently impacted. I've only got one, there's not much data here, but we would see various vulnerabilities be introduced and we'll be able to track that. Now with the vulnerabilities, that I've not got much data here, but I've got a few screenshots that show you what it looks like when it's fully fleshed out. So we do have an example here of all the recommendations that could appear. So you can see here there's going to be a lot of updating this software, impose this configuration change, and it's going to let you know how you can do that. So this is an example of where there's a lot of recommendations to actually update the software that's installed on devices. That's kind of main features. A few things to consider is reporting, which I'll look at next. So within Defender for Business, there is a lot of reporting capability that you can use for both threat protection, vulnerabilities, and even just device health. As an example, I can click into this reports tab here and then go to the threat protection tab, and I can get an understanding of the trends that have occurred over this environment and how threats have maybe progressed, been introduced to the organization, and maybe left the organization by way of being remediated. I can do that up to 6 months in time, and I can get some kind of full trend chart of multiple different insights. So detection sources of threats, currently unresolved alerts, most have been detected by EDR. Threat categories that have been generated, so different categories of threats. Currently unresolved alerts, threat categories of unresolved alerts, so execution, discovery. Severity of current undiscovered unresolved alerts. So it really gives us an understanding of the threat that's in our environment in a full report view. We can get the exact same thing for vulnerable devices. So we can get trends up to 6 months in time of how vulnerability has progressed and trended in our organization. So severity levels over time, device exploit availability over time, vulnerability age over time. So we can not only just see the vulnerability that has been affected our devices, but we can see when there's really old vulnerabilities as well that we might want to make sure don't really stay around for a long time. And we can even see these vulnerabilities by operating system, by Windows 10 version, and much more. So that's kind of the bulk of the features. What I'll quickly do is I'll go through some miscellaneous bits that you will want to set up in the settings area. So in settings and endpoints, there's a few things you want to do. You can set up your email notifications so you can ensure that you're notified whenever an alert occurs and whenever there's a vulnerability. So all we need to do is we just email notifications, click add, and we can go through and create notification rules. When we create these rules, we can include organization's name, but also an organization-specific portal link and include various device information as well. We can ensure that we're only informed and emailed by a certain severity of alert. So that could be medium, high, low, informational. It's down to your own tolerance, really. And then we can set the recipients with their email address of who should be notified whenever there is an alert in this case. And we can do the exact same for vulnerabilities. It looks a bit different, but you put this in here, fill out the notification settings, and do fill out that for the vulnerabilities as well. So you can be notified whenever there's an alert and when there's a vulnerability introduced into the organization. There's also web content filtering. So within Defender for Business, we can ban categories of websites from being used on devices. That's just done here, web content filtering, and we can create a policy for that. So we just quickly name our policy, and then we can select the categories of websites that we want to ban. Now this will happen across all our devices. We can't scope this, unfortunately, so it will happen across all devices. But we can ban categories such as leisure, so chats, games, legal liability, high bandwidth, adult content, or uncategorized when it's things like newly registered domains. And we can create these policies and then ban these websites categories across all of our devices. Additionally, we do have indicators here where if we want to ban specific IP addresses, specific file hashes, specific URLs or certificates, we can do that here by creating indicators of compromise and ensure that they're blocked as well. We saw that in the alert page when we could add an indicator for a file. This is also particularly important if a customer is using an existing antivirus solution where they might have a list of indicators that they've built up over the couple of years already. It's just a simple case of going to say something like a URL domain, adding it, putting an indicator, and saying that you want to block it as well. So that is pretty much my demo. It's a bit of a quick fire overview, really. We're not going through every facet in detail. If you do want to know more, feel free to reach out and we can go in more depth if we need. What I'll do now is I'll hand back to Peter and we'll wrap up this webinar as well.